Hey there, welcome back. Today we are taking a deep dive into the world of human connection. We're going way beyond, that surface level chit chat.
Think a lot less small talk and a lot more soul talk.
It's a great way to put it. We are really going to explore what it truly means to know another person.
To understand their inner world, their motivations, what makes them tick, their perspective, their unique perspective.
And our guide for this journey is David Brooks and his book, How to Know a Person.
The great thing about this book is that he doesn't just give us platitudes, like be more empathetic or whatever.
Right.
He gives us concrete tools and actual insights that we can use to actually become better at connecting with people.
It's practical advice, which I love.
Exactly.
So our mission today is to equip you, the listener, with those same tools.
Give you actionable stuff, right?
Yes, exactly.
Well,
actionable steps that you can use to enhance your ability to connect with others on a deeper level.
for sure.
Are you ready to dive in?
Let's do it.
Okay. So Brooks starts off by acknowledging that, a lot of times we're unknowingly blocking ourselves from really seeing others.
Yeah, and he calls these blocks diminishers, right? Which are these inherent tendencies that we all have that kind of get in the way.
Give me an example of a diminisher. What are we talking about here?
So Brooks actually starts with a really personal story about himself,
Yeah.
He talks about how he used to be kind of a practiced escape artist, really good at dodging deep connection, right? He was really uncomfortable with vulnerability, which I think we can all relate to on some level, right?
Totally.
But he starts there and then he goes on to list these different diminishers.
Okay, so what are some of the diminishers that he talks about?
Well, one that I think a lot of us can relate to is this thing called egotism.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, it's kind of the classic, it's all about me attitude. You're so focused on yourself that you don't have any, you lack the curiosity to actually engage with someone else. Oh, yeah. I know that type. They just dominate every conversation. They always turn it back to themselves.
Okay.
It's like they're wearing blinders, right?
Yeah, like blinders to everyone else.
To everyone else's experiences. Yeah. Okay, so egotism. What else?
Another big one is anxiety.
Okay.
And, Brooks connects anxiety to the fear of judgment or rejection, which makes total sense, right?
Right.
If you're terrified of being hurt, you're not going to let anyone in.
Right. It's like that saying, vulnerability is the birthplace of connection or whatever. But to get there, you have to kind of overcome that fear.
Totally. And then there's this other one, objectification, where we reduce people to categories or roles.
Okay.
Instead of seeing their individuality, he uses this powerful example from Vivian Gornick's memoir, Fierce Attachments.
Okay, yeah.
About her relationship with her mother.
I'm listening. Yeah. And so Gornick talks about how their ability to truly see each other was limited by these kind of generational differences, past hurts, all those preconceptions that we bring into our relationships. They were mother and daughter, but they were stuck in these roles. They couldn't connect.
It's a good reminder that even, in those closest relationships, those diminishers can sneak in and really kind of block us from truly understanding each other.
Right.
So once we kind of recognize these diminishers, how do we start to see others more clearly?
Yeah, well, that's where Brooks introduces this concept of the illuminator's gaze, which I really love.
Okay, the illuminator's gaze. What does that even look like?
Okay, so imagine this. It's a way of looking at someone that reveals their inherent dignity and worth.
Oh, okay.
Right. It's about acknowledging their soul, that intangible essence that makes each person unique and valuable.
Like you're looking beyond the surface, and seeing their potential.
Totally.
Their goodness.
Yeah, and he breaks down the illuminator's gaze into a couple of key features.
Okay.
The first one is tenderness.
Okay.
Approaching someone with warmth and gentleness. He uses Mr. Rogers as the perfect example.
Oh, Mr. Rogers. Yeah, he was like the master of making everyone feel seen and valued.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. What else? So then there's generosity.
Generosity, okay.
Assuming the best in others, extending trust. Brooks connects this to Rembrandt's style of portraiture,
Okay.
where he captured imperfections, but also revealed the inner dignity of his subjects.
So it's about seeing the whole person,
Yes.
flaws and all,
Yes.
but still choosing to believe in their goodness.
Exactly.
That's powerful.
Yeah. He also talks about receptivity, setting aside your own judgments and truly opening yourself to the other person's experience. He quotes this theologian, Rowan Williams, who talks about having a mind that is both slack and attentive.
Ooh, slack and attentive. I love that. It's like creating a space for someone to just be fully themselves.
Yeah.
Without kind of imposing your own expectations on them.
Without judgment.
Yeah, judgment, yeah. Okay, so Tenderness, generosity, receptivity, and what's the last one?
Last but not least, we have active curiosity,
Okay.
approaching others with a desire to learn and understand their unique perspective.
Okay.
And he uses Zadie Smith as an example, the author.
Yeah.
She talked about how as a child, she was just fascinated by her friends from these different backgrounds, and she was always imagining what it would be like to walk in their shoes.
It's like she was developing her empathy muscles from a young age.
Exactly. And, Brooks really emphasizes that this kind of deep seeing, this illuminator's gaze, it takes effort. It takes intentionality. It's not passive.
It's a choice.
It's a choice that we make. So we've got these diminishers holding us back and the illuminator's gaze to kind of help us see more clearly. But how do we move beyond simply seeing to actually connecting?
Right.
And that is where Brooks introduces accompaniment.
Accompaniment.
Think less observation and more like a shared journey.
Okay.
Yeah, he compares it to the naturalist Lauren Isley, who talked about floating down the Platte River and just feeling this sense of merging with the water and the landscape.
I love that.
It's a beautiful metaphor for accompaniment, not trying to control or direct, but just being present, flowing alongside someone else's experience.
I love that. Okay, so not trying to control or fix or anything like that.
Exactly.
Just being there.
Yeah, and Brooks really emphasizes that this often starts with seemingly insignificant things.
Okay.
Small talk, shared activities, just being in each other's presence.
So those seemingly insignificant little moments.
He argues that these little interactions are actually laying the groundwork for a deeper connection. You're building comfort, familiarity, you're allowing your unconscious minds to sync up.
I love that. He even says that sometimes, you can learn more about a person by watching how they interact with a waiter than by asking them some deep philosophical question, right?
Absolutely.
It's about paying attention. It's about those little details.
Those subtle cues that reveal someone's character and values.
But the accompaniment isn't just about the casual moments, right?
Right.
It's also about being there for someone during the tough times.
Yeah.
Brooks talks about the art of presence. Showing up for someone who's grieving or struggling without needing to offer solutions.
Right.
He tells this really moving story about a professor whose students, after her husband died, showed up for her. They didn't offer advice. They just offered their presence.
Yeah.
And it was exactly what she needed.
Exactly.
It's a reminder that sometimes the most powerful act of accompaniment is simply being there.
Right.
Letting someone know that they're not alone.
Okay, so we've covered diminishers, the illuminator's gaze, accompaniment. Where do we go from here?
Okay, well, Brooks kind of takes us a little deeper, and he emphasizes this core idea that a person is a point of view.
Okay.
Right. And it's understanding that everyone constructs their own unique way of seeing the world. Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
A person is a point of view.
He uses this really kind of heartbreaking story to illustrate this point, and it's about this French family coping with the loss of their young daughter in the tsunami.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the author, Emmanuel Carrère, was there, and he witnessed their grief, and he observed how this mother, Delphine, was forever changed by this experience. It shifted her entire worldview.
It's a very stark example.
Yeah.
But it shows how, events, especially traumatic ones, can really shape how someone sees the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Brooks actually uses brain science to back up this idea.
Okay, I love when he does that.
Right. So he talks about how our brains are constantly engaged in this process of prediction and correction. We don't just passively absorb information. We are actively constructing our reality.
Right.
Based on our prior experiences and expectations.
It's like those classic experiments where you miss the gorilla walking across the screen or the person switching places when you're asking them for directions.
Yes, exactly. We miss things we're not expecting because our brains are filling in the gaps.
Right.
And Brooks says, to truly understand someone, we need to understand how they know us, how they perceive our words and actions through their unique lens.
So how do we access that point of view? How do we bridge that gap between our own perspective and someone else's inner world? This is where things get really interesting, right?
You bet. This is where the art of conversation comes in.
Okay.
And Brooks, even as, this skilled writer and conversationalist himself, he admits that he struggled with this.
Really?
Yeah, he talks about how he used to be a topper in conversations.
A topper? What do you mean?
Yeah, like always needing to have the last word or the wittiest remark.
Oh, wow. So even someone who makes a living with words can struggle with real conversation.
Absolutely.
That makes me feel better about my own, awkward moments.
Right.
But the good news is he decided to actively work on it. And he shares some of his kind of secrets in the book. Okay, let's have it. What are some of the conversational secrets that he talks about?
Well, one of the most practical tips he gives is to treat your attention like an on-off switch, not a dimmer.
Okay.
It's about making a conscious choice to be fully present in the conversation. He even recommends this thing called the slant method.
The slant method, what is that?
Sit up, lean forward, ask questions, nod, track the speaker.
I love that. It's like a physical reminder to be engaged. No more like pretending to listen while scrolling through your phone.
Exactly. And along with those visual cues, he also emphasizes active back channeling.
Active back channeling.
Those little verbal and nonverbal cues that show you're listening.
Okay.
Nodding, saying, or tell me more, those kinds of things.
It really lets the other person know you're not just hearing them, but you're actually trying to understand, right?
Right. He also talks about the power of asking good questions, not just to gather information, but to really tap into someone's emotional experience.
Okay.
So instead of asking, what happened, try asking, how was that for you?
Oh, yeah, that's good.
It invites them to reflect on their feelings about an event, which can lead to, much richer insights.
Totally.
And then another thing, don't be afraid of the pause.
The pause, yeah.
Brooks says to embrace those moments of silence. They can feel uncomfortable at first, but they allow for deeper reflection and understanding.
Yeah, I think, we're so quick to fill the silence sometimes that we miss those opportunities.
Absolutely.
For deeper connection.
Another technique he talks about is looping.
Looping, okay.
Which is paraphrasing what the speaker has said.
Right.
Just to make sure you understand.
Got it.
And to keep the conversation focused.
So it's so what you're saying is...
Exactly.
It might feel a bit formal at first, but I think it's really helpful, actually, to make sure that you're both on the same page.
Yeah. And it can gently steer the conversation back on course if things start to go off on a tangent.
Right. It's a very subtle way to kind of redirect.
Totally. And then, speaking of steering conversations, Brooks has some really insightful advice about how to handle disagreements, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, disagreements. Always looking for tips on that.
Right. So instead of just repeating your own point over and over again, he suggests trying to find the disagreement under the disagreement.
Find the disagreement under the disagreement. Okay, I like that.
Right. So it's about uncovering those underlying values that are driving the difference of opinion.
Well, that's good.
Right. So let's say you're debating, I don't know, something like gun control.
Mm-hmm.
The real disagreement might not be about, the policy itself.
Right.
But about these deeper values.
Like what?
Like personal freedom versus public safety.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
Right. Getting to the heart of those values can lead to a much more nuanced and productive conversation.
Totally.
It's not about winning,
Right.
It's about understanding.
I like that.
Okay, so moving on, Brooks talks about his friend David Bradley, who has this really interesting method for helping people with problem solving and decision making.
Okay, what is it?
It's called the index card method.
The index card method. All
right. And he basically uses these carefully crafted questions that he writes on index cards to help people gain clarity about their goals, their skills, their values, all these things.
It's like he's giving them a framework for self-discovery.
Exactly.
Guiding them to uncover their own answers.
Yeah, and Brooks points out that Bradley, specifically focuses on asking open-ended questions that encourage these narrative responses.
Okay.
Because as Bradley says, and I love this quote, people answer better with stories.
Oh, that's good.
When they're telling their story, they relax, they open up, they reveal more of themselves.
I like that a lot.
Brooks also learned a really valuable lesson about questions from a very unexpected source, Condoleezza Rice.
Condoleezza Rice, wow, okay.
Right. And what's interesting is that she actually appreciated, his broad, sometimes even kind of dumb questions, because it helped her step back from the day-to-day and see the bigger picture.
So even the simplest question can sometimes spark a new insight.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like that.
He also shares a story about connecting with a stranger on a plane simply by asking about a book they were both reading.
Okay.
And it turned into this really deep and meaningful conversation.
Proof that curiosity and shared interests can be powerful catalysts for connection.
Absolutely.
Okay.
He even suggests trying this at dinner parties, instead of sticking to those safe topics the weather or whatever.
Yeah.
Throw out a big thought-provoking question, something that really gets people talking.
Okay.
He gives this example of someone asking, what should I do with the rest of my life?
Wow, that is a big one.
It sounds intense, but he said it sparked this really fascinating conversation.
So it's about being willing to go there.
Yeah.
To go a little deeper.
To get vulnerable.
Okay, so I think, like, the key takeaway here is that mastering conversation can be a game changer when it comes to knowing a person.
Absolutely.
By learning to truly listen, ask great questions, be vulnerable, create space for genuine dialogue.
Yeah.
We can unlock, so much deeper understanding.
For sure.
Both in ourselves and in others.
Absolutely.
Okay, so, speaking of understanding, I think it's also important to kind of acknowledge the broader societal context that we're living in right now.
Yeah, Brooks talks about this epidemic of blindness, He's referring to these rising rates of depression, loneliness, and declining social connection.
It's like we're all kind of losing the ability to see each other.
Right, and he links this to this fascinating concept from this philosopher, Axel Honneth, called the recognition order.
The recognition order.
Yeah, so it's basically the idea that societies have these kind of criteria for who gets seen, who gets respected, who gets valued. And Brooks argues that in our current society, we often base that recognition on these, external factors.
Like what?
Like wealth, beauty, status,
Yeah, all the superficial stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Which leaves a lot of people feeling unseen and unimportant.
Okay, I see where he's going with this.
Right. And then he says, this can lead people to seek belonging and validation in, other ways.
Like what?
Like through political tribes.
Oh, yeah.
Online communities, these kinds of things.
Right, where they feel seen or heard.
Right. And Brooks is really critical of what he calls the politics of recognition.
Oh, interesting. The politics of recognition. Okay.
He says, while joining a group can offer this temporary feeling of community, it often creates division.
Right.
It prevents us from seeing the humanity in those we perceive as different.
It's us versus them.
Right, exactly. It's us versus them. He sees it as this zero-sum game. One side needs to be demonized to make the other side feel superior.
And it's not really connection then, is it?
Right. It's this very shallow form of connection that ultimately doesn't provide that deep belonging that we all crave.
So how do we kind of break free from that, like that us versus them mentality?
Well, Brooks says we need to shift our focus to understanding the profound impact of personal history.
Personal history, okay.
Yeah, he argues that there are two levels of education.
Okay.
The first is this kind of unconscious learning about, safety, love, worthiness that we experience in childhood. And then the second is that ongoing process of understanding the world and our place in it.
Okay, so there's the foundational stuff, and then there's how we kind of build on that.
Right, exactly. And he draws on the Grant study, which followed hundreds of men over their lifetimes.
Wow.
And it found that a warm, loving childhood was actually a huge predictor of well-being and success later in life.
Interesting.
And conversely, those with difficult childhoods were more likely to face challenges.
Right.
Mental health, relationships, those kinds of things.
That makes sense. It's like, the foundation of the house, right?
Exactly.
If the foundation's shaky, the whole house is going to be a little off.
This is where he introduces this really fascinating concept of sacred flaws.
Sacred flaws. Okay.
Yeah, those defense mechanisms that we develop in response to early wounds.
Okay.
So things like, overreactivity, emotional numbness, needing to be right, needing to control.
Right.
These are all ways of protecting ourselves.
Okay.
But they can really sabotage our relationships. They prevent us from connecting authentically.
So it's like they served a purpose at one point.
Yeah.
But now they're kind of holding us back.
Exactly. And Brooks emphasizes that healing from those early wounds often requires more than just introspection.
Right. You need other people.
We need help from others to gain perspective and break free from those ingrained patterns. And that leads us to the very crucial topic of empathy.
Empathy. I mean, everyone talks about empathy. But how do we actually get better at it? What does that even look like?
Well, Brooks sees empathy not just as a feeling, but as a set of skills that we can actually learn and develop.
Okay, I like that. It's not just something you're born with, it's something you can cultivate.
Exactly. And he breaks it down into these three key components.
Okay.
Mirroring, perspective taking, and caring.
Okay, break those down for me. What does mirroring look like in practice?
So mirroring is about accurately reflecting someone's emotions. being able to read their verbal and nonverbal cues and respond in a way that shows you understand.
So it's like holding up a mirror to their feelings so they feel seen and heard.
Exactly.
What about perspective taking?
So perspective taking is the ability to step into someone else's shoes, to imagine what it's like to see the world from their point of view.
Okay. And caring is, pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah.
It's showing genuine concern and a desire to help.
Exactly. Brooks offers some really practical advice for how to strengthen these skills. So for mirroring, he suggests practicing observation and even physical embodiment.
Sure.
Like try mimicking someone's posture or facial expressions.
Oh, yes.
This is a way to kind of tune in to their emotional state.
So it's not just about understanding their words, but also paying attention to their body language.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then for perspective taking, he suggests try imagining yourself in their situation.
Okay.
Or reading books and watching movies that expose you to different viewpoints.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And then to cultivate caring, Brooks encourages simple acts of kindness, active listening, being present for others in their time of need.
Right.
And he shares this incredibly powerful story about a woman who, due to a brain injury, would sometimes fall to the floor.
Wow.
And she confided in Brooks that what she really needed wasn't for people to rush to help her up,
Oh, wow.
but for someone to simply sit down on the floor with her.
That is such a beautiful example of empathy. It's meeting someone where they are,
Yeah.
without judgment, without the need to fix anything.
Oh, exactly. It's about just acknowledging their experience and letting them know that they're not alone.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. Diminishers, the illuminator's gaze, accompaniment, understanding that everyone has a unique point of view, developing empathy as a skill set.
Right.
Is there anything else that we should know about how to truly know a person?
Well, Brooks also explores personality,
Okay.
specifically the big 5 personality traits:
Oh, yeah, the big 5. Okay.
openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism.
Ocean.
Yes, ocean.
I've heard of those. Yeah, they're like these core dimensions that really shape how we think, how we feel, and how we behave.
Exactly. And Brooks emphasizes that these traits are both gifts
Okay.
and areas for potential growth.
Right.
He uses really vivid examples from the book, like Erica, who's this high extrovert who just thrives on excitement.
Mm-hmm.
And then John F. Kennedy, who's aversion to boredom, kind of hinted at this high openness to new experiences.
So knowing about these traits can help us to understand both our own tendencies
Yes.
and the tendencies of the people around us.
Exactly. And the good news is personality isn't fixed.
Oh, good.
It can evolve over time with effort and intention.
It's empowering. We actually have the ability to kind of shape who we are.
Yeah. Building on personality, Brooks introduces the concept of life tasks.
Life tasks. Okay.
These challenges and goals that we face throughout different stages of life.
Okay.
And he explains how our consciousness kind of develops to meet the demands of each task, right? Shaping how we see the world, how we interact with others.
Makes sense.
Yeah, so it starts in early childhood with the need for safety and security, moves into childhood where we learn to exert control over ourselves and our environment, and then on to adolescence where the focus shifts to navigating relationships, social dynamics.
Yeah.
And then in adulthood, it's about finding our place in the world, contributing to something bigger than ourselves, mastering a vocation, and eventually leaving a positive legacy.
So it's this constant evolution as we kind of move through different stages of life.
And Brooks really emphasizes that these transitions between life tasks can be messy.
Yeah, I imagine.
They require a lot of, adaptation. We have to learn to let go of old mindsets and embrace new ways of being. And he illustrates this with some stories from the book, Adam Newman, who went from this really challenging childhood to finding meaning and giving back to others.
Okay.
And then there was Peter, who is this business executive struggling to transition from this me-centered focus to this more we-centered focus.
So understanding these life tasks can give us insight into where someone might be.
Exactly.
And their own personal development.
Exactly. And then to really understand someone's unique journey, Brooks emphasizes the power of their life story.
Their life story.
Yeah. He cites research showing that we often underestimate how much we enjoy.
Oh, interesting.
And connect through sharing stories, even with complete strangers.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And he distinguishes between 2 types of thinking, right?
Okay.
So you've got paradigmatic thinking, which focuses on categories and generalizations.
Yeah.
And then you've got narrative thinking,
Okay.
which is attuned to individual experiences and change over time.
Right.
And he says that narrative thinking is so crucial for truly knowing someone.
Because it allows us to appreciate their individual path, their unique path.
Exactly. And he encourages us to look beyond the imago.
The imago.
That idealized image that people often present to the world.
Right. Like their Instagram persona or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Like the filtered version of themselves.
And try to see the authentic self beneath.
Right.
Be curious about their story, ask open-ended questions, really listen.
Mm-hmm. And be present.
Yeah. Brooks then shifts his focus to these moments of deep seeing.
Deep seeing, okay.
These instances where someone perceives us with incredible accuracy.
Wow.
And understanding.
I love that.
Yeah, he shares some really powerful examples from the book, like his own experience of being called out for glibness by his 11th grade English teacher.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. He also talks about FDR's insightful recognition of Lyndon Johnson's potential.
Okay.
Tracy Kidder's deep connection with Debeo, a survivor of the Rwandan genocide.
Powerful examples.
Yeah. And he even analyzes that transformative scene in Good Will Hunting where the therapist, really confronts Will's deepest fears.
Yeah, that's such a good scene.
So good.
It's so powerful.
And these moments, they just highlight the power of vulnerability, trust, and compassion. They show us how being truly seen, even in our imperfections, can be so healing.
It's about recognizing that shared humanity, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so now, building on those individual connections, Brooks introduces the concept of the interpenetration of minds.
Yeah, love this concept.
What is that?
It's this idea inspired by Douglas Hofstadter, and it suggests that knowledge and wisdom emerge not just from individual reflection,
Okay.
but from this ongoing conversation and exchange of ideas between people.
I love that.
Yeah, he uses this example of a long-running book club where the members' individual insights kind of weave together over time, creating this collective understanding that's so much richer than any one person's perspective.
It's greater than the sum of its parts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he encourages us to seek out these communities of truth.
Communities of truth.
Where we can engage in this open-minded exploration and dialogue.
So it's not just about that one-on-one connection, but it's about creating those spaces.
Yes.
Where multiple perspectives can kind of come together and enrich our understanding of the world.
Exactly. As Brooks concludes his book, he reminds us that this journey of knowing ourselves and others is ongoing.
Right.
It requires constant effort, humility, and a willingness to learn and grow.
It's not about reaching some endpoint, some perfect understanding.
Right.
It's about embracing the process.
Yeah, with all its complexities and imperfections.
I love that. And he leaves us with this really thought-provoking question. What one step can you take today to see someone in your life more deeply?
Such a good question.
Yeah, it is. It really is. It's something for all of us to kind of reflect on.
Yeah.
Maybe it's reaching out to someone you haven't connected with in a while, asking a more thoughtful question in your next conversation.
Yeah.
Or even just, putting down your phone and giving someone your undivided attention.
It's being present.
Being present, yeah.
Remember, knowing others deeply is a skill that you can develop. And as Brooks so beautifully illustrates, it's a journey worth taking.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into David Brooks's How to Know a Person.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep seeking, keep exploring, and keep connecting.